Sweat trickled down my neck as I frantically typed the last slides of my presentation. The ancient air conditioner in our apartment wheezed and sputtered, pumping more noise than cool air into our living room. Boston summers were always brutal, but this one felt especially punishing. I glanced at my watch. Only 2 hours left before the client meeting. Liam? Clara's voice floated from the kitchen. Your mom called. I winced, keeping my eyes fixed on the laptop screen. What did Judith want? Clara appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. Her dark curls were piled in a messy bun, and she wore that faded MIT t-shirt I loved. Even in the sweltering heat, she looked effortlessly beautiful. She wants us to come over Sunday for your birthday dinner, Clara said, crossing her arms. I told her we'd be there. I groaned, finally looking up from my work. You said yes? Without asking me? What was I supposed to say? She's your mother, Liam. Clara sighed, crossing the room to sit beside me on our worn leather couch. Besides, it's just dinner. We'll survive. Easy for her to say. Clara wasn't the one who had to watch her mother-in-law make thinly veiled jabs at her career choices all evening. Judith had never approved of Clara's freelance design work, always referring to it as her little hobby, despite the fact that Clara brought in nearly as much as I did with my corporate job. I know that look, Clara said, nudging my shoulder. You're imagining all the passive-aggressive comments your mom's going to make about my unstable career path. I closed my laptop. That obvious, huh? Clara laughed, the sound warming me more than the stifling heat. After 5 years together, I can read your mind. She took my hand, her fingers cool against my skin. I can handle Judith. I've been doing it for years. It's your birthday, we'll go eat some cake, make small talk and leave. You're too good to her, I said, squeezing her hand. And to me. I know, she replied with a wink. Now finish your presentation while I work on the Henderson project. Those website mock-ups won't design themselves. I watched her walk back to her workspace in the corner of our living room. Her drafting table was cluttered with sketches and color swatches, a stark contrast to my meticulously organized desk. That was Clara, creative chaos wrapped in determination. I didn't deserve her patience, especially when it came to my mother. Judith had never made it easy. From the moment I introduced Clara as my girlfriend, my mother had sized her up and found her wanting. It wasn't that Clara wasn't accomplished. She was brilliant, talented, and more successful at 30 than most designers were at 40. But she wasn't the polished corporate lawyer or doctor that Judith had envisioned for her only son. And she never let either of us forget it. Hey, I called out to Clara. Thank you. For dealing with all this. With her. Clara smiled without looking up from her sketch. It's what we do, right? You survived my father's fishing trip last summer. I can handle your mother's birthday dinner. I returned to my presentation, trying to focus on market projections and quarterly goals, but my mind kept drifting to Sunday. Judith always managed to turn even celebrations into subtle battlegrounds. Last Christmas, she'd given Clara a book on turning your passion into a real career. The year before that, it was a gift certificate for professional attire that might help when you're ready for office interviews. The evening stretched on, the heat finally breaking as the sun set. Clara and I worked in companionable silence, the soundtrack of our relationship, her pencil scratching on paper, my keyboard clicking, the occasional sigh or muttered curse when something didn't work out as planned. By midnight, my presentation was finally done. Clara had fallen asleep on the couch, her sketchpad balanced precariously on her chest. I carefully removed it, setting it on the coffee table before carrying her to bed. As I slid in beside her later, the sheets still warm from the day's heat, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sunday's dinner would be more than just cake and small talk. With Judith, it never was. I sprawled across our couch the day before the dreaded dinner at Judith's, enjoying a rare moment of calm. Clara had left an hour ago to pick up supplies for her latest design project, leaving me with explicit instructions to relax and stop overthinking the birthday dinner. Easier said than done, but I was trying my best, mindlessly flipping through a book while our ceiling fan labored above me. The doorbell's shrill ring jolted me from my attempted relaxation. I wasn't expecting anyone, and solicitors rarely made it past our building's security door. Curious, I padded to the front door in my bare feet. A delivery man in a blue uniform stood in our hallway, holding a sleek white box with a ribbon. "Delivery for Liam Mercer," he announced, consulting his digital tablet. "That's me," I said, accepting the unexpected package. It was heavier than it looked and cold to the touch. After signing for the delivery, I carried the box to our kitchen counter, examining it with growing curiosity. The box was elegant, Pristine white with a navy blue ribbon and an embossed gold logo I recognized immediately, Mayon chocolate. This wasn't your average box of sweets. Mayon was the kind of luxury brand that celebrities gifted each other, where a small box cost more than a decent dinner for two. I was still staring at the box when I heard Clara's key in the lock. "I'm back," she called, bustling in with several bags of fabric samples. The textile warehouse was a madhouse, but I found exactly what She stopped short when she saw the package. "What's that?" "Just arrived," I said, turning the box to show her the logo. "Someone's got expensive taste." Clara set down her bags and approached the counter, her expression curious. When she spotted the small card tucked under the ribbon, her eyebrows shot up. "That's my mother's handwriting." "Judith?" I was genuinely surprised. My mother-in-law wasn't exactly known for her generosity, especially not the extravagant kind. "Are you sure?" Clara nodded, carefully pulling out the card. I'd recognize her perfectly slanted script anywhere. She was quite insistent on penmanship lessons when I was growing up. She opened the small envelope and read the card aloud. "Specially selected for you, Judith." We exchanged confused glances before Clara untied the ribbon and lifted the box lid. Inside, nestled in individual velvet-lined compartments, were 24 exquisite chocolate truffles. Each one was a work of art, some dusted with gold, others marbled with different shades of chocolate, a few topped with crystallized flowers. "Wow," I whispered, the rich aroma of fine chocolate filling our kitchen. "This is unexpected." Clara's mouth twisted into a wry smile. "That's putting it mildly." She picked up the card again, examining both sides as if searching for a hidden message. "My mother has never spent this kind of money on chocolates. Not even for my father's funeral reception." The mention of Clara's father cast a brief shadow between us. He'd passed away 2 years ago, and his absence had only made Judith more controlling, as if she were trying to fill the void he'd left with her own domineering presence. "Maybe it's her way of apologizing for being so critical of your career?" I suggested, though neither of us believed it. Clara laughed, the sound hollow and unconvinced. "More likely she's trying to sweeten us up before delivering some unwelcome news at your birthday dinner." I picked up one of the truffles, a dark sphere dusted with what looked like edible silver, and offered it to Clara. "Want to try one?" She shook her head, stepping back from the counter. "No thanks. I'm still full from lunch." She began unpacking her fabric samples, effectively ending the conversation about the mysterious gift. I returned the truffle to its velvet nest, deciding to wait as well. Something about the unexpected extravagance made me hesitant to indulge right away, though I couldn't articulate why. For the rest of the afternoon, the box sat on our counter like a beautiful intruder. I caught Clara glancing at it several times as she worked on her designs, her expression unreadable. We'd been together long enough for me to recognize when something was bothering her, but I also knew better than to push. By evening, we'd both seemingly forgotten about the chocolates, focusing instead on our usual Saturday night ritual of takeout and a movie. But as we settled on the couch with our Thai food, Clara suddenly said, "It's just so odd, don't you think? Those chocolates." I nodded, stabbing at my pad thai. Definitely not a typical Judith move. "It makes me uneasy," Clara admitted, setting down her chopsticks. "My mother doesn't do anything without calculation. Every gift, every invitation, there's always an agenda." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Well, whatever her agenda is, we'll face it together tomorrow." Clara squeezed back, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. As we turned our attention to the movie, the chocolate box loomed in my peripheral vision from the kitchen counter, pristine and perfect, waiting to be opened. The digital clock on our microwave read 11:47 when I crept into the kitchen. Clara had been asleep for over an hour, her soft breathing a gentle rhythm I'd left behind in our bedroom. I hadn't planned on a midnight snack, but after tossing and turning for what felt like forever, the thought of those chocolates had become an irresistible siren call. The apartment was silent except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city filtering through our partially open window. The box of truffles sat exactly where we'd left it, bathed in the moonlight streaming through the kitchen blinds. "Just one," I whispered to myself, carefully lifting the lid to avoid any noise that might wake Clara. The chocolates looked even more tempting in the dim light, their intricate designs almost magical. I selected one at random, a dark orb coated in what appeared to be crushed pistachios. The moment it touched my tongue, I nearly gasped aloud. The flavor was extraordinary, rich, complex chocolate melting into a creamy center with hints of salt and caramel that balanced the sweetness perfectly. Before I knew it, I was reaching for a second, this one topped with a delicate crystallized violet. It was just as incredible but with completely different notes, floral with a ganache center that tasted faintly of lavender and vanilla. Unbelievable, I murmured, already eyeing a third. The rectangular truffle with gold dusting delivered an unexpected burst of passion fruit, so vibrant I could almost forget it was chocolate at all. The fourth had a whisper of smoke and sea salt. The fifth, a warming hint of cinnamon and chili. I lost track of time as I worked my way through the box, each chocolate revealing a new flavor profile more surprising than the last. Some were familiar, hazelnut, raspberry, orange, while others were utterly novel combinations I couldn't even name. It wasn't until I reached for another and found empty velvet that I realized what I'd done. I'd eaten the entire box. Every single one of the 24 exquisite truffles that had been meant for both of us. I stared at the empty container in disbelief, a mixture of satisfaction and mild horror washing over me. Well, that happened, I said to the empty kitchen, running my tongue over my teeth to catch any last bit of chocolate. Strangely, I didn't feel guilty. Clara had explicitly said she didn't want any, and these were technically my birthday chocolates. Even if my birthday wasn't until tomorrow. My mother-in-law had addressed them to me after all. Still, I hadn't meant to devour the entire box in one sitting. I left the empty container on the coffee table, evidence of my midnight indulgence. Clara would laugh in the morning, probably make some joke about my lack of self-control. She always teased me about my sweet tooth, calling it my one predictable weakness. Back in bed, I slid carefully under the covers, trying not to disturb Clara. She stirred slightly, murmuring something in her sleep before settling back into stillness. The taste of chocolate still lingered pleasantly on my tongue, a kaleidoscope of flavors that somehow blended into a harmonious whole. As I drifted toward sleep, I wondered idly what had possessed Judith to send such an extravagant gift. It was so out of character. In the 5 years I'd known her, Judith's gifts had always been practical to the point of being impersonal: kitchen appliances, business books, once even a subscription to a financial planning service. Never something as frivolous and purely pleasurable as gourmet chocolates. Maybe Clara was right about her mother having an ulterior motive. Or maybe, and this seemed far less likely, Judith was finally making an effort to be more personable. Either way, I'd find out tomorrow at dinner. The thought of facing my mother-in-law brought a familiar knot of tension to my stomach, momentarily displacing the chocolate-induced contentment. Judith had a way of filling any room with her expectations, her judgments silently radiating like heat from a furnace. Even her compliments came wrapped in conditions: Clara's designs are quite good for someone without formal training, or Liam's doing well at that company, though I'd hoped he'd aim for something more prestigious. Clara handled it better than I did. She'd had a lifetime of practice navigating her mother's particular brand of criticism disguised as concern. I'd only had 5 years, and I still hadn't mastered the art of letting Judith's comments slide off me. The chocolate high was beginning to fade, replaced by the heaviness of impending sleep. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring: judgment, tension, perhaps even a rare moment of genuine celebration. For now, though, I could surrender to the simple pleasure of a full stomach and the warmth of Clara beside me. My last conscious thought before sleep claimed me was wondering if Mayon chocolate made truffles in the shape of olive branches. If things got tense tomorrow, I might need to order some as a peace offering for eating all of Judith's expensive gift without saving any for Clara. The scent of fresh coffee pulled me from sleep. I blinked awake to sunlight streaming through our bedroom window and the empty space beside me where Clara should have been. For a moment I lay still, savoring the quiet and the knowledge that today was my birthday. 33. Not a milestone by any standard, but still a day when I could reasonably expect to be pampered a little. As if responding to my thoughts, Clara appeared in the doorway, holding a steaming mug and wearing nothing but my old Harvard t-shirt. "Happy birthday, chocolate monster," she said, her lips curved in an amused smile. She handed me the coffee and sat on the edge of the bed. "I see you had a midnight feast." I took a grateful sip before answering. "I may have gotten a bit carried away." "A bit?" Clara laughed, raising an eyebrow. "You demolished the entire box, Liam. I didn't even get to try one." "You said you didn't want any," I protested weakly, sitting up against the headboard. "Yesterday when I was full from lunch. I was saving my appetite for later." She wasn't truly annoyed, I could tell. Her eyes held more mirth than irritation. Were they at least as good as they looked? "Better," I admitted. "Honestly, Clara, they were the most incredible chocolates I've ever tasted. Each one was completely different. There was this one with passion fruit that..." The shrill ring of Clara's phone interrupted my rhapsody about the truffles. She grabbed it from the nightstand, checking the caller ID. "It's your mother," she said, her expression shifting to what I called her Judith face, polite but guarded. I groaned. "It's not even 9. What does she want?" Clara shrugged and answered with forced brightness. "Good morning, Judith." "Yes, he's right here." She handed me the phone, mouthing "be nice" as she did. "Mom," I said, trying to sound pleased. "Thanks for the early birthday call." "Liam, darling," my mother's voice was as crisp as ever. "I wanted to be the first to wish you a happy birthday. Did you receive my little gift?" I glanced at Clara, who was watching me closely. "The chocolates?" "Yes, they arrived yesterday. They were unexpected." "Did you enjoy them?" There was an odd tension in her voice that I couldn't quite place. "They were incredible," I said honestly. "Some of the best I've ever had." "Oh." Her tone sharpened with interest. "So Clara liked them too?" I hesitated, then decided a small white lie might smooth things over. "Actually, Mom, Clara didn't get a chance to try them. I may have eaten them all myself last night." The silence that followed was so profound I wondered if we'd been disconnected. "Mom? Are you there?" "Yes." Her voice had changed, becoming tight and strange. "Liam, I need to speak with Clara. Right now." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at the phone in confusion. "What happened?" Clara asked, taking the phone back from me. "I'm not sure. I told her I ate all the chocolates and she went weird. Then she hung up." Clara frowned, about to say something when her phone rang again in her hand. She looked down at the screen and her face drained of color. "What's wrong?" I asked. She turned the phone so I could see the screen. The caller ID read Clara Sell. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Your phone is right here." Clara's hand trembled as she answered and put it on speaker. "Hello? Clara? Clara, is that you?" A frantic voice that was unmistakably Clara's own came through the speaker. "Thank God you answered. Listen to me, don't eat the chocolates. Whatever you do, don't eat the chocolates from my mother." Clara and I stared at each other in stunned silence, the impossible voice continuing to pour from the phone between us. "Clara? Are you there? This is going to sound crazy, but I'm calling from tomorrow. There's been a terrible..." The voice cut off abruptly, replaced by static, then silence. Clara's fingers were white around the phone. "What the hell was that?" I shook my head, my mouth dry. "I don't know. Some kind of prank." That was my voice, Liam. My exact voice. Clara stood up and began pacing. "And it came from my number. How is that even possible? Maybe your mother set it up somehow? As a bizarre birthday prank?" Even as I suggested it, I knew it made no sense. Judith wasn't exactly known for her sense of humor, let alone elaborate pranks involving voice technology. Clara was already dialing her mother back, her movements sharp with urgency. She waited, then pulled the phone away from her ear with a frustrated sound. "Voicemail. She's not answering." My stomach churned uneasily, and not just from the excessive chocolate consumption of the night before. Something was very wrong. "She said not to eat the chocolates," I said quietly. Clara turned to me, her face pale. "But you already did. All of them." We both looked toward the living room, where the empty chocolate box still sat on the coffee table, beautiful and now somehow menacing in the morning light. "Do you think?" I started, then stopped, the possibility too absurd to voice. But Clara finished my thought anyway, her eyes wide with the same dawning realization. That there was something wrong with the chocolates my mother sent. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of traffic outside our window and the suddenly too loud ticking of the kitchen clock. Clara burst through our apartment door 2 hours later, her face flushed and hair wild. She'd left to search for her mother after multiple calls went straight to voicemail. "I found her," Clara announced, dropping her purse on the floor. She was at the country club, pretending nothing was wrong. When she saw me, she nearly dropped her mimosa. I'd been pacing the apartment since she left, torn between thinking we were overreacting to a bizarre prank and genuinely worrying that I'd consumed something dangerous. "What did she say?" She pulled me aside, all frantic, asking if I'd eaten anything strange recently. Clara ran her hands through her hair, messing it up further. "When I mentioned the chocolates and that you'd eaten them all, she went white as a sheet. She kept asking if I was feeling okay, if I'd had any symptoms." "Symptoms of what?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach that had nothing to do with the chocolates I'd devoured hours ago. Before Clara could answer, a sharp pain lanced through my abdomen, doubling me over. I gasped, clutching the kitchen counter for support. "Liam? Clara was at my side instantly, her hand on my back. What's wrong? I don't. Another wave of pain hit, this one worse than the first. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Something's not right. The world tilted sideways as I slid to the floor, my vision blurring at the edges. I could hear Clara's voice, high with panic, but her words seemed to come from far away. The pain in my stomach spread outward, a burning sensation that reached my chest and throat. I'm calling an ambulance, Clara's voice cut through the haze. She was kneeling beside me now, phone pressed to her ear. Just hold on, Liam. Stay with me. I wanted to tell her I wasn't going anywhere, that it was probably just food poisoning, but my mouth filled with a metallic taste that made speech impossible. I turned to the side and vomited on our kitchen floor. Clara's hand gripped mine as she spoke urgently into the phone, giving our address and describing my symptoms. The pain ebbed momentarily, allowing me to focus on her face. She looked terrified, her eyes wide and brimming with tears she was fighting to hold back. They're coming, she said, setting the phone down to stroke my clammy forehead. Just a few minutes? Hold on. Time blurred. I was vaguely aware of Clara placing a cool washcloth on my forehead, of her voice murmuring reassurances that neither of us believed. The pain would recede, then return with brutal force, each wave leaving me weaker than the last. When the paramedics arrived, they moved with urgent efficiency. A female paramedic with close-cropped gray hair knelt beside me, checking my vital signs while asking rapid-fire questions. How long has he been like this? About 20 minutes, Clara answered, hovering nearby. It came on suddenly. Any allergies? Medications? Drugs? Clara shook her head. No allergies or medications. He doesn't do drugs. Has he eaten anything unusual in the last 24 hours? Clara and I exchanged a glance. Chocolates, she said. Expensive truffles from my mother. He ate the entire box last night. The paramedic's eyes narrowed. Do you still have the box? Clara turned to grab it from the coffee table but stopped short. It was right there, she said, pointing to the empty space. I swear it was there this morning. There was no time to puzzle over the missing chocolate box. The paramedics were already loading me onto a stretcher, and 4-line in my arm. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through my body, and I must have lost consciousness briefly. When I came to, I was in the back of an ambulance, sirens wailing. Clara sat beside me, clutching my hand, her face a mask of worry. The female paramedic was adjusting something on my fore, her expression grim. The truffles, I managed to say, my voice a rasp. What was in them? Clara leaned closer. I don't know. My mother wouldn't say, but she was terrified when I told her you'd eaten them. The paramedic's gloved hands worked efficiently, attaching monitors to my chest. Blood pressure's dropping, she called to her colleague. Step on it. Clara's grip on my hand tightened. Liam, please. Stay with me. I tried to respond, but another spasm of pain tore through me. This time I couldn't hold back a cry of agony. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified and I retched again, bringing up nothing but bile. Almost there, the paramedic assured us as the ambulance swerved sharply. The hospital's emergency room was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. I was transferred from the stretcher to a bed, surrounded immediately by a team of medical professionals. Clara was pushed back but refused to leave, her voice rising as she insisted on staying with me. A doctor leaned over me, his face serious. Mr. Mercer, can you hear me? I managed a weak nod. We're going to run some tests and get you stabilized. Your wife mentioned you ate chocolates that might have been contaminated. Is there anything else you've consumed in the last 12 hours? No, I whispered. Just the chocolates. And coffee this morning. He turned to a nurse. I want a full toxicology panel, stat. This isn't standard food poisoning. The last thing I heard before darkness claimed me was Clara's voice, demanding answers from someone. The doctor, maybe, or perhaps she was on the phone with Judith. What did you do? What was in those chocolates? Tell me or I swear to God. Then nothing but blackness and blessed relief from the pain. I drifted back to consciousness slowly, like swimming up from the bottom of a murky lake. The first thing I registered was the rhythmic beeping of machines. The second was Clara's warm hand wrapped around mine. When I finally managed to open my eyes, her face swam into focus, etched with exhaustion and relief. Hey, she whispered, leaning closer. You're back. My throat felt like sandpaper. How long? I croaked. Almost 18 hours. She helped me sip water through a straw, her hand steady though her eyes betrayed her fear. You've been in and out. Memories trickled back. The pain, the ambulance, the frantic activity in the emergency room. What happened? Before Clara could answer, the door opened and a tall woman with short black hair and a serious expression entered. She wore a dark blazer over a white shirt, and though she wasn't in uniform, authority radiated from her like heat. "Mr. Mercer," she said, approaching the bed. "I'm Detective Eli Moreno. I'd like to ask you some questions if you're feeling up to it." Clara tensed beside me. "He just woke up. Can't this wait?" Detective Moreno's expression softened slightly. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Mercer, but time is critical in cases like this." "Cases like what?" I asked, my mind still foggy from whatever medications they'd given me. The detective pulled a chair close to my bed. "Your doctors have confirmed that you were poisoned, Mr. Mercer. Not just food poisoning, toxic poisoning. Deliberately administered." The words hung in the air, impossible and yet somehow not surprising after the bizarre warning from Clara's future self on the phone. "The chocolates," I said, pieces clicking into place. "Were they?" "We don't have the box," Moreno interrupted, her dark eyes watchful. "Your wife says it disappeared from your apartment. Can you walk me through exactly what happened yesterday?" I recounted everything: the delivery, Judith's card, my midnight feast, the strange call from Clara's number the next morning, and finally my sudden illness. As I spoke, Moreno took notes in a small black notebook, occasionally nodding. "And you're certain the box was on the coffee table when you got sick?" she asked Clara. "Positive," Clara replied. "I saw it that morning when I brought Liam coffee. But when the paramedics asked for it, it was gone." "Could someone have entered your apartment while you were at the country club confronting your mother?" Clara's eyes widened. "I suppose it's possible. We have a doorman, but he might have let someone up if they said they were family or friends." I shifted in the hospital bed, wincing at the pull of 4 lines. "Detective, do you think Judith meant to poison me?" Moreno's expression remained neutral. "I'm not drawing conclusions yet. Can either of you think of anyone else who might have taken the chocolate box? Anyone who had access to your apartment?" Clara and I exchanged glances. "My sister Naomi," Clara said slowly. "She has our spare key. She stopped by last week for coffee, which was unusual. She rarely visits without a specific reason." This caught Moreno's attention. "Tell me about Naomi." "She's 3 years younger than me," Clara explained. "She lives about 20 minutes from our apartment. She and my mother have always been close, closer than I ever was with Judith." I nodded, remembering something. "Naomi called last Tuesday asking if she could drop by. Said she was in the neighborhood and wanted to catch up. It seemed odd at the time because she usually plans visits well in advance." Moreno made another note. "I'll need to speak with both your mother and sister. In the meantime, Mrs. Mercer, do you have security cameras in your building's hallway?" "Yes," Clara replied. "I'll check with the building manager when I go home." The detective stood, tucking her notebook into her jacket pocket. "I'd appreciate that. The sooner we figure out who took that box, the better. It's key evidence." She handed Clara a business card. "Call me directly if you remember anything else or if anything unusual happens." After Moreno left, Clara sank back into the chair beside my bed, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. "You should go home, get some sleep," I told her, though selfishly I wanted her to stay. She shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving you." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the gravity of the situation settling over us like a heavy blanket. Someone had tried to poison Clara. It had to be her the chocolates were meant for, given the warning call, and I'd inadvertently consumed the poison instead. "I need to use the bathroom," Clara said suddenly, standing. "I'll be right back." Left alone, I stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. My thoughts were interrupted by hushed voices in the hallway outside my door, which had been left slightly ajar. I recognized Naomi's voice immediately, followed by Judith's sharper tones. "He wasn't supposed to eat all of them," Naomi was saying, her voice barely audible. "No one eats an entire box of truffles in one sitting." "Be quiet," Judith hissed. "Do you want someone to hear you? This is already a disaster. What are we going to do now?" Naomi's voice trembled. "Nothing. We say nothing. I took care of the box. There's no evidence." Their voices faded as they moved down the hallway, but I'd heard enough. My blood ran cold with the realization. Clara returned a moment later to find me rigid with shock. "Liam? What's wrong? Should I call the nurse?" "I heard them," I whispered. "In the hallway just now. Naomi and your mother." Clara went still. "What did they say?" I repeated the exchange verbatim, watching as Clara's expression shifted from confusion to horror to cold fury. "They tried to poison me," she said, her voice unnaturally calm. "And you got it instead." We need to tell Detective Moreno. Clara was already reaching for her phone when it buzzed with a notification. She glanced at the screen. The building manager sent me the hallway footage from yesterday. She paused, her eyes meeting mine. Want to see who took our evidence? 3 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. Still weak and shaky, I leaned heavily on Clara as we made our way through the parking garage to her car. The doctors had explained that I'd been fortunate. The dose I'd received had been intended to be administered gradually over time, not all at once. My body's immediate and violent reaction had actually saved me from more serious damage. You okay? Clara asked as she helped me into the passenger seat. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and worry, but her eyes were sharp with determination. Better than being in that hospital bed, I replied, settling into the seat with a wince. My stomach muscles still ached from the violent vomiting, and the doctors had warned it would be weeks before I felt completely normal again. Clara rounded the car and slid into the driver's seat. Detective Moreno is meeting us at the apartment. She's bringing the search warrant for my mother's house. The investigation had moved quickly once Clara had shown Moreno the security footage from our building. The video had revealed Naomi entering our apartment building just 20 minutes after Clara had left to confront Judith at the country club. 40 minutes later, she'd exited carrying a small bag that likely contained the chocolate box. Do you think they'll be there? Judith and Naomi? I asked as Clara navigated through Boston traffic. The thought of facing my would-be murderers, my own family by marriage, sent a chill through me despite the warm June day. Clara's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. No. Moreno's team is bringing them in for questioning while we searched the house. She thought it would be easier that way. Easier. Such a simple word for such a complicated situation. Nothing about this was easy, not the betrayal, not the attempted murder, not the realization that Clara's own mother had tried to poison her slowly and methodically. When we arrived at our apartment building, Detective Moreno was waiting in the lobby, dressed in the same no-nonsense dark blazer and slacks I remembered from the hospital. She nodded in greeting, her expression serious. Mr. Mercer, glad to see you vertical. How are you feeling? Like I've been run over by a truck, but I'll survive, I said, attempting a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. We should get going, Moreno said, checking her watch. The team is already at the house, waiting for us before they begin the search. The drive to Judith's sprawling colonial in Newton was tense and mostly silent. Clara stared out the window, her profile a study in contained fury. I reached across the console to take her hand, and she gripped mine with surprising strength. Judith's house stood imposing and pristine as always, its manicured lawn and carefully trimmed hedges a testament to her obsession with appearances. Several unmarked police cars were parked in the circular driveway. A uniformed officer stood guard at the front door, nodding to Moreno as we approached. We've secured the premises, he reported. Just waiting on your go-ahead to begin the search. Moreno turned to us. Mrs. Mercer, you mentioned your mother keeps an office on the second floor? Clara nodded. Last door on the right. It's usually locked. We have a warrant that covers the entire property, Moreno assured her. If that door is locked, we'll open it. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, the familiar scent of Judith's expensive perfume hanging in the air. Clara and I followed Moreno and two plainclothes officers up the curved staircase to the second floor. As expected, Judith's office door was locked. Stand back, one of the officers said, producing a small tool kit. Within minutes, the lock gave way with a soft click. Judith's office was immaculate, like everything else in her life. A large mahogany desk dominated the space, facing windows that overlooked the backyard garden. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes and carefully placed ornaments. What exactly are we looking for? I asked as the officers began methodically going through desk drawers and filing cabinets. Anything related to the poisoning, Moreno replied. Documentation of poison purchases, correspondence with Naomi about their plan, information about insurance policies that might establish motive. Clara moved to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines as if in a trance. She always kept important documents behind her art history books, she murmured, pulling several volumes aside to reveal a wall safe. Moreno raised an eyebrow. You know the combination? My birthday, Clara said with a bitter laugh. Not because she cared about me but because it was easy for her to remember. 7th month, 14th day, 89. She spun the dial and the safe door swung open. Inside were stacks of documents which Clara began passing to Moreno. The detective laid them out on the desk, her expression growing more grim with each page she examined. Forged medical insurance documents in your name, Moreno said to Clara. With your mother and sister listed as beneficiaries. Clara reached for another folder. Look at this, printouts of web searches about poisons. Arsenic specifically. And here, I said, pointing to another document, a revised life insurance policy draft that completely excludes me. There's another policy here, Moreno said, holding up a different document. In your name, Mr. Mercer, with what appears to be a forged signature. The evidence mounted with sickening speed. Folders of financial records showing Judith's mounting debts. Emails between Judith and Naomi discussing Clara's stubborn health and how to solve the problem before it's too late. Notes about arsenic dosages and symptoms. It was overwhelming, this careful documentation of a plot to murder Clara for insurance money. The methodical planning horrified me almost as much as the intent itself. This is more than enough for an arrest, Moreno said finally, sliding the documents into evidence bags. My team is bringing your mother and sister in now. Clara stood by the window, her back to us, shoulders rigid. I went to her, placing my hands gently on her arms. They were going to kill me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. For money in this house. My own mother and sister. I had no words of comfort that wouldn't sound hollow, so I simply held her as she stared out at the garden where she'd played as a child, now forever tainted by betrayal. 4 months passed in a haze of medical checkups, legal meetings and sleepless nights. Autumn arrived, painting Boston in fiery oranges and reds that seemed to mock the cold dread sitting in my stomach as the trial date approached. I still wasn't fully recovered. The arsenic had taken its toll, leaving me with lingering fatigue and occasional tremors in my hands. The doctors assured me these symptoms would fade with time, but they couldn't say how much time. Meanwhile, Clara and I existed in a strange suspended state, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while the legal machinery ground forward. Ready? Clara asked on the first morning of the trial, her voice steady though her eyes betrayed her anxiety. She stood in our bedroom doorway, dressed in a conservative navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a simple style that made her look both younger and somehow more vulnerable. I nodded, adjusting my tie. As ready as I'll ever be. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, their cameras flashing like lightning as we approached. Our lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Denise, met us at the entrance, guiding us through the throng with practiced efficiency. Remember, no comments to the press, she reminded us in a low voice. Just keep walking. Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators. The attempted murder of a daughter by her mother had become something of a local sensation, fueled by Judith's prominent social position in Newton's elite circles. We took our seats behind the prosecutor's table. Across the aisle, the defense section remained empty, awaiting Judith's arrival. Naomi, we'd been told, had agreed to a plea deal in exchange for her testimony against her mother. When Judith finally entered, escorted by her attorney, I felt Clara stiffen beside me. Judith looked smaller somehow, stripped of her usual designer clothes and carefully styled hair. Instead, she wore a simple beige suit, her silver hair pulled back in a modest bun. The transformation was clearly calculated to present her as a harmless older woman rather than the calculating would-be murderer the evidence revealed her to be. As the court was called to order, Judith turned slightly, her eyes meeting Clara's across the room. I expected anger or defiance, but what I saw instead was a blank emptiness that somehow chilled me more than rage would have. The prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Helen Chin, presented her opening statement with devastating precision. She laid out the case methodically, the chocolate truffles laced with arsenic, the forged insurance documents, the emails between Judith and Naomi discussing the plot, the web searches about poisons, and finally, the damning security footage showing Naomi retrieving the evidence from our apartment. This was not a crime of passion, Chin concluded, her voice ringing through the hushed courtroom. This was a calculated attempt to murder the defendant's own daughter for financial gain. The evidence will show that Judith Blackwood planned this crime with cold precision, enlisting her younger daughter as an accomplice, and would have succeeded if not for a twist of fate that led Mr. Mercer, rather than his wife, to consume the poisoned chocolates. Judith's defense attorney rose next, a silver-haired man whose expensive suit and confident demeanor screamed high-priced legal talent. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his voice warm and reasonable, what we have here is a tragic misunderstanding. A birthday gift gone terribly wrong. A joke in poor taste perhaps, but certainly not attempted murder. Clara's hand found mine, her grip painfully tight as the defense attorney continued spinning a narrative about a birthday prank that was never meant to cause serious harm. Mrs. Blackwood is a respected member of the community, he said, gesturing toward Judith. who had adopted an appropriately remorseful expression. A widow who devoted her life to raising her daughters. Are we to believe that such a woman would suddenly decide to murder one of those daughters for money? Or is there perhaps another explanation for this unfortunate series of events? The parade of witnesses began after the opening statements. First came the medical experts, explaining the effects of arsenic poisoning and confirming that the levels found in my system were consistent with the consumption of a large amount at once, rather than the slow administration that would have been intended if Clara had eaten 1 or 2 truffles per day as Judith had likely planned. Next was Detective Moreno, her testimony clear and damning as she walked the jury through the investigation and the mountain of evidence discovered in Judith's home office. Throughout it all, Clara sat beside me, her face a mask of composure that cracked only when Naomi took the stand late in the afternoon. Her sister looked haggard, her once stylish appearance now disheveled, her eyes darting nervously around the courtroom before finally settling on Judith. It was her idea, Naomi said, her voice barely audible until the judge instructed her to speak up. The truffles were her idea. She ordered them special, had them delivered to her house first, and then she did something to them. Added the arsenic. She told me it would look like Clara got sick naturally if she ate just 1 or 2 a day. And what was the motive for this plan? The prosecutor asked. Naomi swallowed hard. Money. The house. Mom's in debt, has been for years. She remortgaged the house after Dad died, invested in some scheme that went bad. The insurance policy on Clara would have paid enough to clear the debts and keep the house. As Naomi continued her testimony, tears streaming down her face, I felt a strange sense of unreality. How could these people, this family, have plotted something so cold-blooded? How could Judith have raised daughters, loved them, cared for them, only to decide that one was more valuable dead than alive? When court adjourned for the day, Clara and I left through a side exit to avoid the press. The drive home was silent, Clara staring out the window at the autumn leaves swirling in the evening breeze. It was only when we were safely inside our apartment, door locked against the world, that she finally broke down, collapsing into my arms with great heaving sobs that seemed torn from the depths of her soul. The verdict came down 6 years for Judith, with Naomi receiving probation in exchange for her testimony. We left the courthouse for the last time under a dismal November sky, reporters calling questions that we ignored as our lawyer guided us to a waiting car. It's over, I said once we were safely inside, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. The legal proceedings might have concluded, but the emotional aftermath would linger far longer than Judith's prison sentence. Clara sat beside me, staring at her hands. She hadn't cried during the reading of the verdict, hadn't shown any reaction at all beyond a slight tightening of her jaw. It wasn't until we arrived home that she finally spoke. I can't stay in Boston, she said simply, standing in our kitchen as though seeing it for the first time. There are too many memories here now. I nodded, not surprised. The thought had been forming in my own mind as well. Where do you want to go? Somewhere quiet. Somewhere with no connections to my family. She looked at me, vulnerability clear in her eyes. Would you be willing to start over? I know your job is here and… Clara, I interrupted gently, my job doesn't matter. You do. We do. I can find work anywhere. That night we sat at our kitchen table with laptops open, researching places to live. Clara was drawn to Vermont. Small towns, mountains, a different pace of life than Boston's constant rush. I found a few investment firms in Burlington that might be interested in someone with my experience. By midnight we had the beginnings of a plan. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. I resigned from my position, receiving surprising support from my boss, who had followed our case in the news. Clara notified her clients that she would be working remotely and taking on only select projects for a while. We put our apartment on the market, scheduled movers, and began the process of untangling our lives from the city we'd called home. Clara severed all contact with her family. She blocked Naomi's number after her sister's third tearful voicemail begging for forgiveness. She donated the few family heirlooms she'd kept to charity. She even changed her email address, closing the door on that chapter of her life with a decisive click. When we finally drove away from Boston on a crisp December morning, the city skyline receding in our rearview mirror, I felt Clara exhale beside me, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to release something she'd been holding inside for months. No looking back, she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in ages. We found a small house on the outskirts of Montpelier, Vermont, a 2-story colonial with a wide front porch and maple trees in the yard. It needed work. The kitchen was straight out of the 1980s and the bathroom fixtures had seen better days, but it felt like a place we could make our own, untainted by the past. I secured a position at a local investment firm, taking a significant pay cut but gaining a short commute and colleagues who knew me as Liam Mercer, new guy from Boston, not Liam Mercer, victim of a bizarre poisoning plot. Clara converted the spare bedroom into a design studio, filling it with natural light and her collection of reference books and materials. The first weeks were strange. We'd grown accustomed to the constant hum of the city, the neighbors on either side of our apartment walls, the bustle of pedestrians below our windows. The quiet of our new home, punctuated only by birdsong and the rustle of wind through trees, felt almost eerie at first. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder sometimes, half expecting to see Judith there, though I knew she was safely locked away in a Massachusetts prison. Clara would startle at unexpected sounds, her design pen leaving jagged lines across her sketches. We were both jumpy, hypervigilant, our bodies still braced for danger even as our minds knew we were safe. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to ease. I started running in the mornings, exploring the winding country roads around our house, feeling my strength returning with each mile. Clara began taking on more clients, her confidence in her work rebuilding as she created designs from her peaceful new studio. One evening in early spring, we sat on our porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Clara had her legs tucked beneath her in the oversized Adirondack chair, a mug of tea warming her hands. "Do you ever think about her?" I asked, breaking our comfortable silence. We rarely spoke of Judith or what had happened, as though mentioning it might somehow conjure her presence. Clara was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. Finally she said, "I think about what she took from us. Our sense of security. Your health." She paused, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "But mostly I think about what she didn't get to take." "What's that?" "Us." She turned to me then, her eyes clear and steady. "She didn't get to take us, Liam. We went through this together and that's what matters." I reached across the space between our chairs, taking her hand in mine. Her fingers were warm from the tea mug, strong and sure as they laced through mine. In that moment, watching the last rays of sunlight gild my wife's face, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not just the absence of dread, but actual, tangible hope for our future. The poison hadn't just been in the chocolates or in my bloodstream. It had seeped into every aspect of our lives, tainting everyday moments with fear and suspicion. But here, in this new place, I could feel it finally beginning to fade. That night, I heard Clara laugh, really laugh, for the first time since before the poisoning. The sound filled our new home like music, healing something broken inside both of us. Several months after settling in Vermont, we decided to move again, this time to a small coastal town in Maine. The Vermont house had served its purpose as a transition, a halfway point between the life we'd lost and the one we were rebuilding. But when I was offered a position at a boutique investment firm in Portland, we both agreed that the sea air and the rhythm of the tides might complete our healing. Our new home was a weathered blue cottage with white trim, perched on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic. Close enough to Portland for my commute, but far enough away to give us the peace we'd come to cherish. Clara set up her design studio in a sun-drenched room with windows facing the ocean, and I converted the small den into a home office for the days I didn't need to be in Portland. Life settled into a gentle routine. I drive to the office 3 days a week, working from home the other 2. Clara's design business was thriving, her work had taken on a new depth since our ordeal, her creations somehow more vibrant, more alive. In the evenings, we'd walk along the shore, watching sandpipers dart between the waves while discussing our days or simply enjoying the comfortable silence we'd always shared. One Tuesday in late summer, I wrapped up my work calls early and headed home around mid-afternoon. The sky was a brilliant blue, the kind of perfect day that made me grateful to be alive, to have survived the poison that could have ended everything. When I entered our cottage, the scent of homemade soup filled the air. I found Clara in the kitchen, her back to me as she stirred something on the stove. She wore faded jeans and one of my old flannel shirts, her hair piled messily on top of her head. She'd never looked more beautiful. "You're home early," she said, turning to greet me with a smile that held a hint of something I couldn't quite identify, nervousness perhaps or excitement. "Finished my call sooner than expected," I replied, moving to kiss her. "That soup smells amazing. It's that vegetable barley you like." She stirred it once more, then set the spoon aside. "I have something for you." She reached into the pocket of my shirt and pulled out a small white cardboard box with no label. For a moment, my heart stuttered with an echo of old fear. The last time Clara had handed me a small box, it had been filled with poisoned chocolates from her mother. Clara must have read my expression because she quickly said, "It's not food. Open it." I lifted the lid carefully. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a tiny white onesie with the words "Sweetest surprise coming soon," printed in soft gray letters. My mind went blank for a moment, unable to process what I was seeing. When understanding finally dawned, I looked up at Clara, whose eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Are you?" She nodded, her smile breaking through like sunshine. "I took the test this morning. We're going to have a baby, Liam." I set the box down with trembling hands and pulled her into my arms, burying my face in her hair as joy crashed through me like a wave. After everything we'd endured, all the pain and betrayal and fear, here was this miracle, this new life we created together. "This is the best birthday present ever," I whispered against her temple. Clara laughed, pulling back to look at me. "Your birthday isn't for months." "Doesn't matter," I said, placing my hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Nothing will ever top this." That evening, wrapped in blankets against the cooling air, we sat on our porch swing watching stars appear one by one above the dark ocean. Clara was tucked against my side, her head on my shoulder as we gently rocked back and forth. "It's strange to think how close we came to losing all of this," she said softly. "If you hadn't eaten those chocolates all at once, if we hadn't gotten that impossible warning call." I tightened my arm around her, not wanting to revisit those dark memories but understanding her need to acknowledge them. "But we didn't lose it. We're here. We're okay." "More than okay," she murmured, placing her hand over mine where it rested protectively against her stomach. "We're going to be parents, Liam. Can you believe it?" I couldn't, not entirely. It seemed too perfect, too precious after the darkness we'd walked through. A year ago, I had been fighting for my life in a hospital bed, betrayed by the family that should have protected us. Now I sat beneath a sky full of stars with my wife in my arms and our child growing within her. "Boy or girl, do you think?" I asked, changing the subject to brighter things. Clara considered for a moment. "Girl. Definitely a girl. With your eyes and hopefully not your sweet tooth." She laughed softly, and the sound mingled with the distant crash of waves against the shore. "We might need a bigger house eventually," I mused, picturing a little one with Clara's dark curls running along the beach. "Something with a yard." "One thing at a time," Clara said, yawning against my shoulder. "For now this is perfect." And it was. Our little blue cottage by the sea, far from the shadows of Boston and the memories that had nearly destroyed us. As Clara dozed against me, I watched the rhythm of the lighthouse beams sweeping across the water. Steady, reliable, a guide through darkness. In the morning there would be doctor's appointments to schedule, baby books to buy, nursery plans to discuss. But for now, in this peaceful moment, I simply held my wife and silently promised our unborn child that they would only know sweetness. Never poison, never betrayal, only love. The world had tried to take everything from us, but instead, it had given us an unexpected gift. A fresh start, a new life, and the sweetest surprise of all.